Hello boys and girls, I'm Ant, and on today's Mellow Gaming Recommends, we're going to be taking a look at Giant Sparrow's critically acclaimed What Remains of Edith Finch. It's a game in a genre I've come to call narrative exploration games, although some would describe them as walking simulators. I'm not too keen on that name, and I feel narrative exploration does a better job describing what the games actually are. To help me with this, we'll be joined by YouTube wonderkind Under the Moons, who'll be taking us on a little segue a little later on. So sit back, relax, and we shall begin. What Remains of Edith Finch was released initially in April 2017 on PS4 and PC, and had an Xbox One release follow a little later in July of that same year. It's a game where you play as the titular Edith Finch as she explores her idiosyncratic family home, one that has been built upon in various possibly code-violating ways over many generations of the Finch family's lives. The house is long abandoned, and she has headed back to hopefully find answers to questions about the lives of her apparently cursed family. The Finch family, you see, have all died in a manner of tragic ways, with just one member of each generation living long enough to have children of their own. As the game progresses, you explore the time capsule-like rooms of each family member, looking into their belongings and reading diary entries that fill you in on how their lives came to an end. Now, I know looking at diary entries in games is a very boring thing. Sure, it can fill you in on the world, but it's hardly an exciting way to explore a game's narrative. I guess that's why a lot of games have endless recordings of people's thoughts littered around in them these days. At least you don't have to stop playing to take those in. Edith doesn't do that though. Instead, you pick up a character's diary or an object that meant something to them. Instead of being told what happened in their final hours, you play it. Games are an interactive medium after all. Now, playing out the deaths of various characters can seem pretty morbid, which the game is fully aware of. It willingly leans into morbidity quite often, but it also frames death in various ways, not always as a tragic event, but as a series of endings to various character stories. These are presented as miniature vignettes within the main game's narrative. Some play out in a very matter-of-fact way, such as the death of young Calvin, who fell off a rope swing into the ocean. Some are more abstract, such as Molly's fever dream after eating some toxic holly berries and dreaming of herself becoming a string of various predatory animals, consuming all in their path. I don't want to spoil too many of these, as some can really hit you with a gut punch. Suffice to say, the game frames death and the mourning of loss as stages of life everyone goes through, and presents the idea that we should preserve the memory of who we've lost however we can. How the matriarch of the Finch family, Grandma Edie, chose to do this was to retain each family member's bedroom as it was the day they died, a sort of time capsule museum of that person's life. At a later point, Dawn, Edith's mother, boarded up all the rooms from the outside so her children couldn't learn of how cursed the family was. She seems to hope that this would somehow break the curse that she believed had caused her son, an aspiring artist, Milton, to go missing. More on that later. Over the decades, the family have increased in size, and due to all the rooms being kept as time capsules, new rooms were built by Grandma Edie and her husband Sven, building off the original house that had been brought all the way from Norway in the early part of the 20th century. Sven had a bit of a whimsical mind to design, and as such the house is littered with secret passages and hidden doors, making your exploration a little more exciting than just wandering around an empty space. Giant Sparrow has filled the entire house with objects and details that make it feel genuinely lived in and full of history. Remember how Gone Home felt a little bit creepy at times, wandering around a deserted house? A fact it leaned into from time to time. Well, I've heard people saying they were expecting all sorts of creepiness to happen in What Remains of Edith Finch, due to just how much like an old haunted house it could feel. Probably didn't help that the game is fixated on death. Now, I don't want to spoil things, but no, the house isn't haunted. It's just full of the spectres of the past, in a metaphorical sense. I genuinely love the way this house has been designed. It shows a stunning level of world building and storytelling in every corner you explore. Over the years, games have told stories in a number of ways, usually through cutscenes or the environment. I kinda prefer the latter, personally. There's nothing wrong with the cutscene approach, usually, but it does feel like you're often stopping the game part of a game so it can pretend to be a movie. A few years back, a game was released called Dear Esther, I'm not a massive fan of it, but it does make a solid attempt at telling a story with minimal interaction. In it, you wander around an empty island while a story is told to you in fragments. Part of why I don't gel well with this game is that really you have no impact on the storytelling. It may as well be an audiobook with the chapters mixed up a bit on each play. That said, it gave people ideas. Games such as Tacoma, the Stanley Parable and the Norwood Suite have all played around with telling stories in non-violent and more interactive ways. Some involve piecing together stories, such as in Tacoma, and some focus on how you as a player interact with games to make you part of the narrative. The Stanley Parable and its spiritual successor, Crows, bizarre and blissfully short but massively long titled Dr. Langerskov the Tiger and the Terribly Cursed Emerald, A Whirlwind Heist do this interactive narrative thing in an incredible way. Highly recommend playing both of them. The latter is a free game too, so you've got no excuse. What Remains of Edith Finch sits in a nice middle ground. Your exploration moves the story forward, with text appearing on screen alongside Edith's narration, and so does the gameplay in various mini-stories. Some are pretty simple, but a couple really stand out to me. One character called Barbara was killed in an apparent home invasion. As a child, she was a star of a few horror films famed for her scream. The story plays out as you read a comic book made after her death. It's presented as sort of Tales from the Crypt style twisted tale. As you read the comic, you take control of Barbara within the comic book panels, while John Carpenter's Halloween theme fittingly plays over the top and gets a number of YouTubers a nice content ID claim. This sequence plays off horror movie tropes perfectly, whilst presenting itself in a rather unique way. Another story that really stuck with me is that of how Edith's older brother Lewis died after committing suicide. Lewis was struggling with reality in a number of ways due to depression and drug abuse. He worked at a fish cannery where his job every day was to slice the heads off fish. He gets tired of the monotony and withdraws into a fantasy world while he works. The way the game presents this is pretty stunning. You control Lewis at his fish slicing post, grabbing the fish as they come and moving them over to the slicer to take off their heads. You do this with one analog stick while simultaneously using the other to control a fantasy version of Lewis as he explores a magical kingdom world on a quest to become king. At first, this fantasy world is crude and takes up a small portion of the screen, but as he withdraws further and further into it, the game becomes more complex and the detail begins taking over the entire screen, all while you continue chopping heads off fish. I don't think I've come across a game that's managed to depict a subject like this in such a clear and inventive way. You play it and you get it, especially as you'll realise you're cutting the heads off fish with little actual thought given to the action of doing so. I think this is the sequence many people discuss when they talk about how brilliant this game is. I hope you can now see how What Remains of Edith Finch presents itself as a series of small games within a larger game narrative driven by exploration. But what if I told you its story extends beyond this game and into another one altogether? Well, kinda does. That game is called The Unfinished Swan. Truth is though, I haven't played this game. Now I could read a wiki page and tell you all the cliff notes on it, but that isn't my style. Instead, let's get someone to take over who has.
It's 2019, this kind of thing should be accepted. So I think the best use out of these controllers is to really hold one there and just push.
Moves.
Oh, it's you.
Talk about Unfinished Swan for 3 to 5 minutes.
The Unfinished Swan. I haven't played that in a while, but I'll give it a shot. The Unfinished Swan. This was Big Sparrow's first outing. Nominated for 3 BAFTA awards and winning 2 of them, enough to say people noticed the sparrow in the room. So what was so award-winning about The Unfinished Swan? What was it about? Will Big Sparrow always incorporate bird names into their titles? Probably. But let's focus on the what. What is The Unfinished Swan? Artwork can be subjective. The further from reality it is, the more we tend to see our own thoughts and emotions on the canvas. And a painting of a swan would be just this for a young boy named Monroe. Living with his mother, an artist who can never quite finish her works, one who had amassed a total of 300 incomplete paintings, Monroe was happy. But at her sudden passing, Monroe was sent to live at an orphanage. Told he could only take one of her works, his mother's favourite painting of a swan. a choice that would mean far more to Monroe's past than his somber present. But that night, Monroe awoke to find the swan had left its canvas. From equipping his mother's paintbrush to following the webbed footprints, Monroe entered through a doorway, one that had not been there before. And so begins Monroe's journey. And like all great pieces of work, one starts with an empty canvas. Gameplay that opens with a splat. The Unfinished Swan is all about discovery. Throughout the story, Monroe uncovers the past, along with us, the player. But how Big Sparrow chose to reveal this world to us is truly unique and poetic. Using a black splat for the paintbrush, the world around us starts to take shape. At first, we use it to simply navigate out of the square room. But the further we go, the more is revealed. Constructed items, plant life, and various creatures are uncovered. We find a path across water and come across a broken castle. In here we learn the castle was owned by a king, believing no colour was good enough for his gardens. Soon the settlers arrived, but claims of injuries arise due to the one-toned kingdom. Alas, the king decides to paint in the shadows. The more we traverse the abandoned corridors in hopes of finding our necklace friend, the more we learn of the ill fate that overcame the kingdom. Gaining access to a balloon in hopes of catching the fleeting swan, Monroe ends up in yet another abandoned kingdom. While dragon-crowded labyrinths consume the last, the end to the king's new attempt at a grand settlement would be discovered by replacing paint splats for water. This matching of surrounding with a new tool of discovery continues throughout the Unfinished Swan. It truly is a large takeaway, one you can see reflected in Big Sparrow's follow-up, What Remains of Edith Finch. And in hopes of not dampening the effects of a potential new player may have with the Unfinished Swan, in light of what I've hopefully enticed you with so far, I'm going to skim to the part that connects the two games together, the king. While the Unfinished Swan sees you play out as Monroe, the unravelling story focuses more on the king and his failure to seek happiness surrounded by his creations. To leave and start again is something we learn the king does several times. The connection between What Remains of Edith Finch suggests that, quite like his brother, the king sought to escape the mundane and create a world of his own. Yet if this game is anything to go by, Milton succeeded with his escape, but found the pursuit of happiness was never for him. With a connection to the Finch family, we may know why he couldn't obtain his dreams. But maybe someone else could. The Unfinished Swan may have passed you in 2013, but if its follow-up game has left you feeling like the Finch's story was somewhat left unfinished, then I'd highly recommend grabbing yourself a copy and filling in the neck. I've been Under the Moons, thank you very much.
Thanks dude, much appreciated. So I think that's all there is I'd like to say about What Remains of Edith Finch. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't want to spoil too much of the game. There's some sequences you just have to play for yourself without spoilers to get their full impact. I played this right at the end of 2017 and was blown away by how powerful it was as a narrative exploration of character, death, and how we deal with mourning people we've lost. Death is everywhere in this game, but it's not presented as something to be scared of, rather it's presented as something to accept and learn from. It tells us that a person you know that passed away is worth remembering for their life, not how they died. Obviously I very much recommend trying this game out. It takes a little over 2 hours to play through, and it is an unforgettable experience. Thank you for watching. Hopefully I'll be back to this sooner rather than later. Please do leave a comment, as I like that sort of thing and it's nice to see. Also, thank you to Under the Moons for helping me with this episode and for daring to be the first person to make a cameo in one of these things. Make sure you give his channel a look and maybe a subscribe too. There's a link in the end slate and in the description. Goodbye folks.